Hello and welcome to this Cambridge IGCSE video. It is going to be useful to you if you're studying any other exam board because we're looking at directed writing, and that means here that we're looking at persuasive writing, which everybody does no matter what exam board. Before we look at the task, let's have a look at the steps to success that I'm going to teach you here. So there are 6 of them. Now, in the directed writing, you have to use the passages that you've studied for the reading questions. And I'm just going to assume that this student has used the passages well, because I'm really looking at the writing component. Now, with any piece of writing, the examiners always ask, does this look like the specified form? You know, if it's a newspaper article or a letter, whatever it is, does it look like that? Now, they're not really interested in the layout on the page. When they mean that, they mean if they listened to somebody read that, would it sound like the thing it's supposed to be? So if it's a magazine article, would it sound like a magazine article? They're not interested in whether you've laid it out in columns, etc. This is the most important thing for any piece of writing. Is it written in a formal register? Register here means your choice of language. Are you writing in a formal way? Now that can be very tricky. The easiest way to demonstrate that is to look at the actual task here, which is to write to your relative. Well, if it's a relative of yours, in this case it's an uncle, the chances are you might be very conversational and chatty in style. And that's bad news, because you will be tempted not to be formal and show off your writing skills. So don't be seduced by a stupidly worded question. They always want a formal style of writing from you. If you then introduce some stuff that's informal, fine, they'll see that that's deliberate rather than you not just being able to master a formal technique. Okay, there are 3 other things that we've got to look at. And in other persuasive writing videos, I've shown you some 15 different techniques that you can use to be really persuasive. But I'm going to simplify things for this video and show you just 2 aspects of rhetoric, 2 aspects of persuasive writing that will give your writing zip, it will give it a bang. Number 1, or number 4 in this case, do you use logic in order to explain your ideas? And number 2, do you also appeal to the emotions, either positively or negatively? If you constantly use logic to show that your ideas make sense, and then you constantly use an appeal to the emotions to show that these ideas are wonderful, then you will always get really high marks. And then finally, does it have the voice of an expert? So you are not writing as yourself. You're writing as someone who is an expert in the thing that has been evaluated. Now, I'll show you what this means, because in directed writing, you do need to evaluate, and there's a trap that the student falls into, which I'll explain, and I'll also show you how to escape that trap. Okay, here we go. Dear Uncle, so it does sound like a letter, it's in the right form. I want to thank you for the article you had sent me earlier, as it had been valuable in granting me some clarity on whether I should apply for a university place. So you can see the language here is formal. I suspect this student speaks English as a second language because she's missed this subtle difference between had and has. That won't count against her too much. Mainly, I was very confused by the mixed opinions I heard about student life at an university. What some alumni said about having to pay back mountainous students' debts really seemed to discourage me. But others who spoke of an unforgettable few years and precious memories, even while struggling, made me think twice. Okay, well, here we've got these green words: precious, discouraged, mountainous, and I could have had unforgettable as well. These are all appeals to our emotions. They happen really close together, and this is the mark of a really skilled writer. Again, we've got that slight issue with this student probably not being an English native, as it were, and she has applied the rule of grammar correctly. So when your word starts with a vowel, you can't say a, you have to say an. Unfortunately, this one is irregular and it's a university rather than an university. But following the rules of grammar, which the student has done correctly, it should be an university. Unfortunately, it isn't. I'm sorry about that. But let's come back to the voice of the expert. I was very confused. Now that might be true, but this means that this student is going to evaluate at the end of their piece of writing. Well, an expert wouldn't do that. An expert would have thought things through, come to a conclusion, and then started writing with that conclusion in mind. And so all the evidence that they're going to put forward will show why one idea is not as good as the one they finally settled on. So here the task was to explain whether or not you think going to university might be useful for you. So at the beginning, you have to have a very clear direction, a clear decision about what you want to say. And so although it might be truthful that you're confused, that's a disadvantage to your writing because it doesn't make you sound like an expert. So I would encourage you to put forward that point of view right at the beginning rather than saying you're still weighing things up. When you do weigh things up in order to evaluate, what you're actually doing is saying, idea A that I've got is absolutely brilliant. Idea B is pretty good, but it's not as good as idea A, and this is why. Although I'm not marking the use of evidence for the passages, because I can't show that for copyright reasons, you can clearly see here that the student is getting in early with the evidence. So there's a clear use of ideas from the passages, and that's going to get those marks that are awarded for content rather than writing. So those of you studying IGCSE, the technique is to get those things in early. Make sure you bag those marks as you go. Hopefully we'll see them also on the next page. Let's have a look. We've jumped ahead slightly. It goes on to say it won't really matter once you graduate and start earning immediately, and it backs up the notion with the fact that 96% of graduates found work under 4 years of leaving university. This doesn't express how hard the repayment of student loans are even after university is behind you. Besides that, it also skims over having to slave away at your desk space for years, just so you can scrape by the skin of your teeth. Even if students graduate and make it through, there's no real guarantee that they'll find work instantly. The article even admits to that, saying employers won't hire you on degree name alone. The kind of people managing diplomatic, interacting leadership skills they're looking for can't be cultivated between the pages of a 5-inch thick textbook and a desk chair. So you can see how this information from the passages is woven in early in the answer to get it out of the way and bag those marks quickly. Right, let's find out what my green and my yellow mean. So here I'm trying to show you the most important persuasive techniques. So you've probably all been taught something like Da Forest. It's really popular amongst classroom teachers. I know Mr. Bruff teaches that. I teach in my other videos 15 techniques which I teach with the mnemonic Mad Father's Crotch. But actually I'm just simplifying that down to the big ones here, which are metaphor and contrast. If you can master these two techniques, you're automatically getting grade 7 and above. These are, if you like, the ones that mark the difference between an ordinary writer and a brilliant writer. And when you do those, if you can also imagine what the future will be like, you will immediately stand out from the crowd, because most students just think about the advantages now. They don't project 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future to see how this idea that they're proposing will change the lives of everybody, or the maximum number of people, in times to come. In green then, I've highlighted the facts, the appeal to logic that the student is giving us here. So it backs up the notion with the fact. This doesn't express how hard the repayment of student loans are. There's no real guarantee that they'll find work instantly. So these are appeals to logic. Now, in the yellow, we will have words that appeal to the emotions. So it skims over, it doesn't really explain, this writer is saying, as though it's trying to hide the truth from us. The loans make us slave away a negative account of being at university. Just so you can scrape by the skin of your teeth. So again, you can see how this metaphor, even though it's a bit of a cliche, is there to appeal to our emotions. And then the use of the word even there, just to intensify what the writer is saying. So it even has the cheek to admit, is what she's meaning. So even recommending student loans involves this certain element of deceit, according to the writer. So hopefully you can see that skilled writers intermix the appeal to logic with the emotional appeal. It's not like there are separate sections done in a methodical way. By mixing them up like this, it makes your argument much more coherent. It's an argument that sticks together. It knits together. Imagine these bits are like fingers of two hands interlinking. That's how I try and teach it to my students, so that your ideas interlink like fingers of two hands being brought together. I told you that I want you to be able to use contrast, and by flicking between logic and emotions, you're automatically using a kind of contrast. But now let's look at this, which is in many ways the standout part of the writing. So the article even admits to that, saying employers won't hire you on degree name alone. The kind of people managing, diplomatic, interacting, leadership skills they're looking for can't be cultivated. So we have an immediate contrast. Can't be cultivated between the pages of a 5-inch thick textbook and a desk chair. And now we've got this fantastic metaphor that you can farm something, cultivate it, between a book and a chair. So the metaphor suggests that growing things like character, which is what you've got here, growing character and skills is impossible between a book and a chair. It's a beautiful image that really shows the pointlessness of study. Hey, I'm not saying I agree here. I'm saying that this student has really brought this idea brilliantly to life. So that's a grade 9 turn of phrase, grade 9 contrast, grade 9 metaphor all in one. And then she goes on to do the same here. That can only be gleaned from actually interacting with the world and having more than a pathetic semblance of a social life. So it doesn't have another metaphor in it, but why should it? It's just had one there. But it's got that brilliant contrast. Again, hopefully, you'll be able to spot all the emotional language in there as well. And then we return to our green and yellow, which hopefully you will spot now as one, an appeal to logic, and the other, an appeal to the emotions. Let's see how it sounds. It's true that going to university gives you an edge over your competition and can teach you invaluable skills and has access to the latest research and resources. But I find I can I can more easily gain the same type of knowledge and even more by going after professional qualifications and working with people not just pages alone. So again, you've got the contrast between having people instead of pages. It does help that they both begin with P. That's a nice little trick there to make the contrast really work. So we'll jump to the end now. Even though in our modern world of cutthroat competition, a degree is probably the best weapon to have in your arsenal, I'd rather settle for an adequate shield and my happiness intact than compromise on my mental health and stress levels for a sharp sword. Now, this is an outrageously good metaphor. So having a degree is like a weapon, but our writer presents themselves as a pacifist who doesn't want to be ruled by this kind of violent workplace in her image, but instead wants to protect herself against the stress of modern work life where you work 12 hours a day relentlessly to pay off your student debt. So this is a beautifully, beautifully crafted. It's another grade 9 bit of genius. Then she finishes, "My sincere thanks to you once again for your concern on my choices and for the information you sent me. It helped me loads, and I can finally say I know exactly what I want to do. Hope you're keeping well and we get to meet up sometime soon." So we've got this colloquial ending, which is fine because she's used lots of formal vocabulary all the way through, that formal register I was talking about, to prove that she's in control of what she's writing. Now, I hope you can see that this would have been an even more powerful piece of writing if she'd explained right from the outset that despite the many advantages of gaining a degree and going to university, this was an action that she was going to reject. That would have given great clarity to her writing, but it would also have forced the reader to think, wow, this is going to be something interesting. I'm going to be persuaded that something that I think is a really good idea, going to university, is actually a bad one. So it's really a way of gripping and hooking the reader into an argument that they want to meet. They want to see how this writer will evaluate it. Now here, even at the ending, we get from the metaphor here that she doesn't want to go to university, but it's not really explicit earlier on. So she should really tell us quite categorically that university is not going to be for her, but also what she will do instead. So finally, we need to go back to the mark scheme and see what sort of mark it's going to get. You can see that the marks are out of 15 for the writing. Is there a consistent sense of an audience? Well, there's definitely a real sense of the audience. I would say it's mostly consistent. I'll put an M for mostly. I really would have liked that definitive point of view put at the beginning. And that also links to the idea of being authoritative. That means that you're writing as an expert. Remember, that's what I wanted to teach you at the beginning. Is it in an appropriate style? Yes, it is. It is mostly fluent, although there is the suspicion I have that this is from somebody whose first language isn't necessarily English. It's very closely there. There are lots of varied sentences, a huge range of vocabulary which we love, and there's a pretty good structure. But hopefully you can see the issue we've got here, which is that if she had given us her opinion right at the beginning, her conclusion, her evaluation, rather than saying she was confused, that would have given us a greater structure. But that would also have made it more authoritative, and it would also have made it more consistent. So having that evaluation early, that conclusion early, is actually getting you into the top band in 3 different ways. First, it shows you're consistent, then it shows you're authoritative, and then it shows you've got a good structure. Now, clearly it's been well paragraphed, the points have been made in a logical order, so it's sequenced, and spelling, punctuation and grammar are pretty much always accurate. So, we're getting into the top band, but not fully into it. So then we come down here. The sense of an audience is mostly secure. Well, it's at least as good as that. There's definitely evidence of style and fluency, so it's definitely going to be at least as good as the top end of that, and possibly as good as the bottom end of this. Some markers might go as far as that as well, because as you know, marking is subjective. So you've got something here which is close to a grade 9, and it's got aspects of grade 9 in it. And so my gut reaction is that we're going to give this a grade 8, probably. But some examiners might be stingy and say, well, I'm going to give it a 7+. If I have time, I'll go on to make the next video, which will be about the creative writing, descriptive and narrative, and you'll be able to read what she's written for that. I'm not going through that now, but hey, it's there in the video, and you can get ahead. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're still here at the end, well, you're bound to get a high grade because you've got stamina, you've got chutzpah, you've got determination. I would love you to be my student. Well done.